In order to ensure that we keep things moving along at a reasonable pace, Father Stefan has arranged for formal responses to be given, and it's my pleasure to ask Tricia Boller to come and give the first response to those three papers. It seems appropriate, since you're wearing a Dominican medal, for me to point out that St. Thomas seems to begin the answer to every question that starts with whether. He responds with, I respond. So, respondes.
Thank you very much. And thank you especially to all the presenters for your diverse look into these three great men who served their God in the way in which they were called, witnessing to their faith through their life and in their martyrdom. In each presentation we are looking more deeply into, I think, what it means to be a Christian martyr. And by what criteria might one be considered a martyr, not just in death, but the manner in which they died, and more specifically for whom, that is their faith in Jesus Christ, but also, or even more especially by their life, right? Because I think when we're looking at martyrdom, we're not just looking at the form of death, but also their life. And given also the overarching theme of the symposium, we're also looking into in what way does one's spirituality inform the path in which they found themselves in terms of their mission in life and ultimately their death as a martyr for their beliefs. So I think in Becker's examination of the life of Delp, his great work, we see a lot in social justice, and we hear in his writings that we get stuck in the good hours and the bad hours, thus identifying with Christ in his passion, Ignatius at Manresa, where he met God. And also the strength and consolation that is given to Delp as he struggles with what is becoming increasingly clear to be his inevitable fate. The sense of, out of the depths I cry to, O Lord, let your ears be attentive to my voice in supplication. But we also see this tie-in to the words of Christ in Caesarea, where he says, if you would be my disciple, to pick up your cross and to be able to die to self. This sense of total surrender. And with Delp, we don't see as much controversy surrounding his martyrdom, rather examining how his Christian faith strengthened him to receive the grace and crown of martyrdom. But at the same time, I would like to look a bit about, if we're looking at Delp, and to what degree is a Christian called to walk the line between boldly living out one's faith in the face of a spiritually and socially oppressive environment, or more quietly remaining passive witness to one's faith by publicly going along with the authoritative powers that be in the situation that one finds itself. And we do see a distinction here with Delp's understanding of the martyrdom that he's called to, and then Watchman Nee's own presentation of this. I think it is then that certain people feel a sense that they are called to be bold witnesses, as Delp found himself, to be outspoken against the Nazi regime that ultimately would lead to his incarceration and execution. And then at the same time you find others who, not necessarily through weakness, but maybe feel a sense of being called to keep their heads down. And this seems more the approach that Watchman Nee was presenting, in which I'm sort of reminded of the story of Kichijiro in Endo Shusaku's famous book Chinmoku, or Silence, in which, after yet another public apostasy, he laments, in another time I would have been a good Christian. And that's, that's really something to, I think, really bring to our own sense of contemplation. Who is called to be a martyr, to stand as that bold witness, and who is maybe called to kind of go along as a sort of much more quiet, passive witness to one's faith. So really at the end of the story, the question then becomes asked, what is it that our faith truly demands of us? And what can we learn from not just Delp, Bonhoeffer, and Watchman Nee, but to many other Christian martyrs, past and present, and where they felt they were called. In McCann's presentation, we see Bonhoeffer also was a man not without much controversy. And given the time in which he lived, in which his Christian identity and this sort of ministerial priestly fraternity and living out the Christian life and its virtues in ways that came into conflict with an atheistic or anti-Christian government, he saw himself called to boldly combat that evil that so persecutes the Christian and the Christian way of life. And that's where he found himself being called. Again, where does the average Christian, and whatever might be termed as average, feel themselves called? To this sense of combating the persecution in a bold way, even to the point of martyrdom. Again, or to quietly witness from the background, from even, should we say, the underground, to witness to one's faith in a way that is less provocative against the powers that be. Again, I want to look at, I know Bonhoeffer was referred to as not being completely tied up with ethical theory regarding just war, but at the same time, in some other research I looked at, it still says that he was influenced by the Catholics who were involved in the Abwehr assassination attempt on Hitler. And in fact, there was a previous assassination attempt that also failed because the Protestant Christian who was within basically shooting distance in a position to assassinate Hitler could not in the end pull the trigger because of his own concern that it would contravene the great commandment of thou shalt not kill. Right? But those who ultimately became involved in the Abwehr assassination attempt were able to overcome this concern by the Catholic social teaching on just war. And that, so even though it didn't maybe come out as much in his writings, I think there was some influence that Bonhoeffer was able to accede to in his desire to be a part of this attempt that maybe didn't contravene his still understanding of being a pacifist. And I would be interested in your response on that. And then just, again, the understanding of what does it mean to be a martyr. I think Stephen Morgan was referring to in the case of the English martyrs. Many of them were actually ultimately killed, not as heretics per se, but as traitors to the government. And just a few weeks ago when I was in Tokyo for another Ricci Symposium at Sophia University, a paper was presented on St. Andrew Kim, the most famous of the Korean martyrs. And this paper, the researcher argued that Andrew Kim was killed in the process of smuggling things from overseas into Korea, which was part of a lifeline that other missionary priests needed in order to continue their missionary work secretly within Korea during a time of Christian persecution. And the author argued that ultimately Kim was not killed so much for being a Catholic priest, but more as a traitor against the state for the fact that he was caught in the capital of crime of smuggling and traveling beyond Korea's borders. Yet some might argue that for this reason he should not then be considered a martyr, especially not in the regard held by millions of faithful Korean Catholics. My own argument would then be that the very act that he was caught was a direct result of where he felt his Christian duty lied as a Catholic priest in assisting the foreign missionary efforts of others. Okay, so to fulfill this duty, he felt called to be a part of a greater effort to bring Christ to Korea, which required this great risk of breaking these two serious Korean laws at the time. And this was something that he willingly undertook for the salvation of souls. So regardless, I would say, to the extent to which he was ultimately executed for being a Catholic, he never withheld this Christian identity, yet the circumstances surrounding his execution were still a direct result of his Christian faith. Again, so there's kind of this gray area. How was somebody actually executed? How did they die? Sometimes is brought into this argument, should they be considered a martyr or not? Like the recent controversy surrounding the MEP priest who was killed in China, right? Should he be considered a martyr or not? Was he just killed as a victim of bandits or because of his Catholic faith? So again, how would this be applied to the situation of Bonhoeffer Adult? And even with regard to Bonhoeffer, looking at his own view of his own martyrdom, on our blood lies heavy guilt, the guilt of the unprofitable servant who is cast out into outer darkness. And yet today, on the feast of St. Ignatius of Antioch, of which Bonhoeffer felt unworthy in comparison, Ignatius too considered himself unworthy of Christ, writing to the Christian faithful while imprisoned that, "I know it is good for me. Now is the moment," referring to his martyrdom, "that I am finally beginning to be a disciple of Jesus Christ." And that's when he said, "Do not even if I should cry out in weakness, do not withhold me from being made a pure loaf for Christ in the jaws of the wild beasts." Okay, so even he himself, and I think that's really a greater sign of Bonhoeffer's humility, to not consider himself worthy of being compared with some of the early Christian martyrs. And in the interest of time, I'll just wrap this up, I'm sorry. But when we look at Watchman Nee's own understanding of martyrdom, we see a significant departure from what you refer to as Dr. Tony Clark's own Catholic description of biblical themes of oppression, faithfulness, and self-sacrifice, to one in which there is a sense of it's okay to not rise up against a regime that is persecuting the Christian, and that one could be called to be more of a quiet Christian. So again, we see these different ideologies surrounding martyrdom, and I would just be curious to what kind of response we can have about that. But finally, I think in all of these examples of courageous Christian witnesses, we see above all men who died not for an ideology, but for a person, and that person being Jesus Christ. So thank you very much. And I know I have to speak very quickly. I hope you were able to process some of that because you're short on time. But if there is time for any responses to that by any of the authors or more questions, I'd be interested.
Just a simple response.
Yes.
I really enjoyed the three presentations on martyrdom very much. And I really admire the quick, and not that I mean the fact, but the close analysis you made between the three. I also want to point out that even before Christianity, Jesus of Nazareth was crucified as a subversive man. I mean, we have to remember that Jesus died because he was against the state. That was the cause or the reason for his execution. So there is a close connection, I think, over human history, that a spiritual commitment to the risen Lord gets worked out in a very common political act for justice and peace. And yes, there are a lot of questions between them. Are they a martyr? Are they not? But deep down, they gave their life for people and for Christ.
Thank you.